Hey, my name's Sean, I'm a motion graphics designer and editor, and today I'm going to be giving you a behind the scenes look at how I created the brand new Chalkcast overlay. Now before we jump straight into After Effects and the animations, I'm going to just show you a couple of things that I'd done before to make sure that I was prepared to work on a project like this. So to begin with, I always like to do a storyboard, and I also always like to come up with some core values while I'm making this storyboard. So for a project like this, I knew that it needed to look chalked, but have a new, refreshed, professional look to it. But I also knew that I wanted to have some new scenes and new possibilities for content, like reactions or watch parties with the chalked cast. I also always find when I'm storyboarding that I can find some reoccurring common elements that I need to reuse and reproduce throughout the project. But once I'd established all of the scenes I needed and all of the different elements I needed for this project, it was time to jump straight into the animation. Okay, so the first thing that I worked on this project and the first thing I'm going to be breaking down in this tutorial is the intro card. Now, there's quite a lot of different complex elements happening in this intro. For example, we've got all of these letters slowly hand drawing in, which is then followed up by the microphone bouncing into shot. And then to finish it all off, we have the mouse coming along in chalked fashion, highlighting everything and moving it to the bottom left corner. But we're going to start with how to do the letters drawing themselves in. So I made each word chalked and cast in two separate compositions, and each letter had its own layer. Now I'm going to show you how I've done this in the example here. By creating a new text layer, I would type out one letter, and then I would grab the mask tool here, or the pen tool, and I would create a path around the letter which would follow how you would traditionally handwrite the letter. Now, once I'd created this mask, I just had to go to the Effects and Presets tab and find the effect Stroke. And then I would apply this to our layer. I'd then make sure that the path was set as Mask 1 and that the paint style was changed from On Original Image to Reveal Original Image. Now, this is going to make our letter incredibly thin, so we need to increase the brush size until we reveal all of our letter back. And then to animate each letter individually, I would just change the end keyframe to 0% at the start of the composition. And then as time went through, at like 2 seconds in, let's say, I would change this end keyframe back up to 100% by making sure that I ticked the stopwatch here so that I am creating keyframes. And then as you can see here, I now have the letter animate in across 2 seconds. Now, a great way to smooth out this animation is by hitting U on the keyboard to open up all of the keyframes in this layer, and then selecting these two keyframes and pressing F9 on our keyboard to make them easy ease keyframes. Now, this is something that I've done with all of the letters. As you can see here in Cast, the T has actually got an extra keyframe in the middle. And by doing this extra keyframe in the middle, it meant that I could go into the speed graph editor, and for the letter T, I could add two different varying speeds. So it meant that when the first line was getting drawn, it was much slower. And then as you cross the T, which is something that is done traditionally quite quickly, it sped up for that animation. Now, small little adjustments like this to the letters T and the letters A that have multiple pieces of drawing and animation in them really just helps sell the animation. But they don't need to be too precise since this is going to be quite quick anyway in the final product. Now, once I was happy with how the words chalked and cast animated out fully, I would just select all of the layers, right-click on them, and click Pre-Compose. Now, I've already done this, so I'm going to go into the finished composition here, where I have both the words chalked and cast with the underline and microphone. But as you can see, they don't quite look right. They look quite stale and they look rather flat. Now, to adjust this, I just went in and added a mesh warp effect, which you can find in the Effects and Presets tab. And as you can see, it's just distorting the word quite a bit. It creates this mesh, which you can increase the amount of rows and columns for, but you can simply pick a corner and drag it around to distort part of your image. And with this applied to both words, chalked and cast, it creates quite a nice new flow and a more chalked, authentic look. And now for the outlier of this hand-drawn animation, the microphone that bounces in. Now, this looks like a pretty simple animation, but there's a small trick here that really just helps sell the microphone bouncing. So to begin with, I would just create all of my position keyframes, like you can see here, where it goes up, down, up, down, up, down until it finally settles in its resting place. And then the trick to making it look like the microphone is really bouncing is to just adjust the height scale independently of the width. So as you can see, both of the height and width are starting at the same here. And if you want to adjust them independently of each other, you need to make sure that this constrained box is unticked, so it's blank. And then on the next keyframe, where the microphone impacts at the bottom of its bounce, it's going to squish right down to 63%. And then as it goes back up to the peak of its jump, it'll decompress, but not fully. And then on the next one, it's gone to 65%, which is a bit of an increase compared to the 63%, but this is because the bounce isn't at such velocity that it's going to compress the microphone as much. And then you just continue this process until you reach the final keyframe, which is just going to be equal again so that the microphone is back to its original size. And now that we have all of the animations, it's just time to add the mouse highlighting effect, which is all of these shape layers here that just highlight all of the different elements. So the chalked, microphone, cast, and underline, as well as one to highlight them all. And these are just simple boxes with a small, thin stroke at the edge, and then a fill layer that's just 10% opacity. Now, once I'd created all of these shape layers to go over all of these objects, I just selected all of these and pre-composed them, and then I put them into another composition here called intro card, where I animated the mouse cursor. Now, mouse cursors is something I see people struggle to animate, but they're actually relatively simple. You just need to make sure you have a nice flowing path for the position of the mouse, but then when it comes to the actual clicks of the mouse, you just need to make a small adjustment with the scale. So for the mouse here, every time I want a click, I would just go from 100% scale down to 80%, which as you can see as I flick through these keyframes, it just goes from 100% down to 80 and back up to 100 again. And you just have to do this across a couple of frames and just leave it at 80% if you want the mouse to be held down clicking and dragging like I have in this animation here. And the resulting effect of all of these different animations being combined together is the brand new chalked cast logo and intro card. Now these weren't the only logo animations I had to do in the project. I also had to animate the chalked cast Discord and Patreon advert pop-ups, which were done in mere seconds with the help of plugins. Specifically the text animation and flat icons plugins from AE Juice. Now I have an affiliate link in the description where you can find both of these plugins included in the I Want It All bundle, where you get over 70 amazing plugins. And what's better is that these plugins work across multiple editors, from Final Cut, Premiere, After Effects, DaVinci, and so many more. They've massively leveled up my editing game and saved me so much time. If you're interested, make sure to check them out in the link in the description. But without further ado, let's get straight back into the making of Chalkcast. Now the next thing that I'm going to break down for you guys is how I made the background. Now making a fluid animated background for a podcast comes with a couple of challenges. It needs to be an infinite loop and only be about a minute long so it doesn't take up too much storage space, nor is it too computer intensive. It also needed to be interesting but not too distracting. So the first thing that I'm going to break down from making this background texture is the actual background to the background, which is this black moving texture here, which you might not have noticed moves in the actual Chalkcast, but here's how I made it. So I began with this texture here, which I applied the turbulent displace effect to, and I just made some adjustments to the amount and size, and then I just added some evolution keyframes and made sure that the one at the beginning matched up to the one at the end so that it would be a perfect loop throughout. Now, if you don't want to take the time to add a lot of evolution keyframes, you can always go into the evolution here, and by holding Alt while clicking on the stopwatch, you can open up the expression editor. Now, on a new line, you just have to type in the command time times, and then the amount you put will be the amount that the evolution increases per second. So if I go for 20 here and end the expression, it means that at the 1 second mark, the evolution is going to be 20, the 2 second mark, it'll be 40, and so on, and it will keep infinitely increasing until the end of the composition. And now that I have a texture, it's just time to add some solids to apply it to. So first I'm going to start by creating a new black solid, and on this solid, I'm going to change the track matte to texture. Now, if you don't have the track matte button available here, you just need to go to toggle switches and modes here and just select it until you have the track matte option available. So if I change my track matte to texture here, nothing's quite happened yet. I just need to check this box here so it changes to a luma matte instead of an alpha matte. Now the box next to this will just invert what it will take the texture from, but it doesn't really matter which one we pick here. Now, as you can see, there's still some transparency behind this, so I'm going to create a new light grey solid to go behind it. And with this light grey solid, I'm just going to layer it underneath this, so now that the texture is complete. And to darken it up, I'm just going to add one more black solid here, and I'm just going to make sure that when I add this one at the top of my composition, I hit T on my keyboard to lower the opacity a bit, so it's only letting through a certain amount of the texture. And that's everything for creating this background texture. So now it's time to begin working on those red topographic lines. Now to create these lines, we just have to create a brand new shape layer. And by drawing across the image, we're just going to create one straight line. And we're going to increase the stroke to a couple of pixels. And we're just going to change the color to now to a bright red so that we can see what we're doing. Now on this line, we just need to open up this shape layers options here, open up the contents tab, and then we need to click add and we need to select repeater. Now on this repeater here, we're just going to increase the amount of copies and then we're going to move the offset so the red lines fill up our image completely. And then in the effects and presets tab, we're going to find the effect turbulent displace. Now with our turbulent displace effect, we're just going to change the amount and size until we get a topographic look that we're happy with. You can also increase the complexity to get some really funky and really complex shapes and looks out of this effect. Now I've got a topographic look that I'm happy with here, but unfortunately it doesn't move throughout our composition. So similar to what we've done with the background layer, we just need to make some evolution keyframes. So I'm going to start at all zeros here, and then halfway in, I'm going to add some evolution, and then I'm just going to change it back so that it's back to 0, 0, 0 again, so that it is a perfect loop of the effect. Now, of course, you can always do the time expression like we've done on the background layer for this as well. Now, there are some finishing touches to make sure that this looks perfect. Now, we just want to go in and press T on our keyboard again and lower the opacity, similar to what we did with the top layer, just so then it gets a bit of texture from the background coming through the lines. And we also want to go to the Effects and Presets tab and find the effect for Color Gradient. We're then just going to apply this to our layer, which is going to make it all these funky colors, but then you can just pick your highlight color. So I'm going to go with blues for this, and you can just pick some slightly different shades of blue so that it has a bit of a different look throughout the image. And it just adds a bit more depth to the topographic effect. And that's everything for creating a fluid topographic background like the one in Shortcast. The only thing that I had left to do was to add the logo into the bottom left corner. Now, one of the final elements that I'm going to give you a quick insight into is the transition, since it's one that's quite complex but also really simple once it's broken down. So to begin with, I just made a simple circle with a shape layer and then applied this radio waves effect to it. And I just made the composition one frame long so that it was freeze framed on this specific frame. Otherwise the radio waves effect would have it emanate out constantly. I then just, with this pre-composition, took it in here, duplicated it, and made each section 2 seconds long with the time remapping tools in After Effects. I then just went through on each one and I created a mask which would mask out each area so that it would only have the circle that I wanted. And I just had this gradually increase and gain a circle with each step until it was filled out with circles for a couple of frames, and then it went back the other way. Now, with all of these layers selected, I would just pre-compose them again, which brought them into this section here, where I would just add in the background. Now, the background was just simply creating another mask that was the perfect size of this circle, and since all of these circles increase linearly, I just used the mask expansion tool to increase each time by 128 points so that it would slowly increase and reach each circle with the expansion of the transition. And I'd done the same for on the way back down and just slowly decreased the mask expansion again. And then when I had this done, as you can see, it made the transition, but it looked quite janky. So it needed an extra layer of adjustments here. So I selected both of these layers and pre-composed them. And then here, I took the transition And I changed the time a bit so it would hold for longer in the middle. And I also increased the scale of the transition right at the middle, and I made sure that these were easy eased keyframes so that it was a nice flowing expansion, and it just gave the circles a little bit more of a dynamic, fluid movement to them. And stuff like this is just going to really help sell your transitions and animations. And as you can see, this just looks a lot nicer than it did before, where it's just much more static and hard to watch. Now, the only other adjustments I had to make to this transition was to add the logo here into the bottom left corner so that even when the transition expanded, the Chalkcast logo was still there, and then add a nice sound effect, which I grabbed from AEjuice's Sound Effects Pro plugin. Now, this Sound Effects Pro plugin is included in the I Want It All bundle with over 70 amazing plugins, so if you haven't checked it out already, make sure to do so at the end of this video. Now, once I'd completed all of the elements, I just needed to export them and bring them into OBS and arrange everything so it was ready for Rizzo to use on the next live Chalkcast. Now, if you'd like me to do a breakdown on how to import and bring things into OBS and arrange them to make a stream setup like this one, just let me know in the comments and I'll be sure to make a video on that soon. And that's everything for today's video. I'm going to be doing a full breakdown of how I made this logo animation in my next video, so make sure to subscribe for that. See ya!